In this video, we're going to be discussing Rav Yosef, one of the great rabbis of the Talmud in the third generation of the Talmudic rabbis, known as the Amoraim. Those are the rabbis of the Talmud. Rav Yosef, his father's name was Chia, is known as Rav Yosef Bar Chia, mostly known as Rav Yosef. He was a student of Rav Yehuda, and after Rabbi Yehuda's passing, there was a debate who should be the next Rosh Yeshiva of the Babylonian city of Pumpedisa. And there was a debate, it should be Rabbah or Rav Yosef. The rabbis weren't sure, and the difference essentially was that Rabbah was known as an Oiker Harim, which means literally someone who uproots mountains. It means someone who had intellectual prowess, who could prove things, disprove things, tremendous ability to debate, if you will. Versus Rav Yosef was known as Sinai, which literally means Sinai or Mount Sinai, meaning somebody who had a tremendous grasp on Torah knowledge, meaning not necessarily, was Rav Yosef known for his debate prowess, but for knowing all the different laws, obviously the Mishnah, everybody had to know, but also the Brisos, and these are teachings of the previous generations of the Mishnah that did not actually make it into the canon of the Mishnah. Those are much greater volume than the Mishnah, but you need to know these teachings in order to understand the Mishnah and teachings, obviously, of his teachers and other generations. So it was extremely important that they had somebody like that as well. The question is, which is greater? So they sent the question to the land of Israel. Again, these are rabbis in Babylon, so they sent the question to the land of Israel. Which one is greater, Sinai or Oiker Harim? The person who has all this great memorization of and at his fingertips all these different laws and tradition, or the debater, if you will. And they got the answer back, the Sinai Adif. The Sinai is greater. However, Rav Yosef was not promoted to be the Rosh Yeshiva. His colleague Rabbah was, because there was some stargazers apparently that said Rav Yosef is only going to be the Rosh Yeshiva for 2 years. So they felt that if they promoted him to Rosh Yeshiva, he would pass away shortly thereafter. So that was scratched. At any rate, Rav Yosef became the student of his colleague Rabbah, and he did not take any honor or position during the 22 years that Rabbah was Rosh Yeshiva, and he ended up only being Rosh Yeshiva, as was predicted, for only 2 years. Eventually, once he was the Rosh Yeshiva, he's known and he's quoted in the Talmud as a source of many of the teachings of the Brisos, as we mentioned. He also was extremely well versed in the Targum, the translation of the Talmud, of the Torah, of the Tanakh. And even though it does not seem like he was actually the author of the Targum, of the Aramaic translation of the Tanakh, of the books of the Bible, if you will, nonetheless, the Targum on the book of Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, is attributed to him. It seems because he transmitted it, not necessarily he was the author, but it is attributed to him. And if you look in your Tanakh, it'll say Targum Rav Yosef. He also was very well versed in the teachings of Kabbalah and other teachings as well. He also liked to use colloquial sayings when he was teaching his students. For example, some famous sayings of his was "Lefum gam l'shichna," which means according to the camel is the load, which means essentially that based on the person's strength, that is how much work he is given. That's based on the person's talents. That's how much responsibility he has. Another teaching of his is loy achbara ganva lechur ganva, which means it is not the mouse that is the thief, it is the hole. In other words, saying that the fact that you left an opportunity for the mouse to steal, that's who the real culprit is, not the mouse. The mouse is just doing what mice do. They see an opening, they take it. Versus why do you have to leave a hole in your house? So he would use these sayings, and he eventually became extremely ill, and this illness eventually cost him. It seems one of the reasons that this cost him his eyesight, and he became blind. He also this illness caused him to forget his Torah teachings, and his student Abaya had to actually remind him, and he would say, "I don't remember." And his student Uvaya would say, "Didn't you teach us this?" And he would remember his Torah learning. Eventually, the when he became blind and he forgot his Torah learning, he said that when the luchos, the tablets, were broken, those tablets were stored in the aron, in the ark, together with the tablets, the second tablets, which were not broken. And he used this to illustrate that even though he had, quote unquote, he was a broken tablets, he had forgotten his Torah study, etc. Nonetheless, one should not mistreat a Torah scholar who forgot his study. Obviously, it was not on purpose; it was because of his illness. There's a lot of stories associated with the fact that he was blind. One interesting story is that there was a debate amongst the rabbis whether or not a person is obligated, a person who's blind is obligated in the mitzvahs, in the commandments, and he said that anyone who would tell him that the law is that a person is not obligated, he would make a big party for him, and by doing that, basically saying like, hey, I'm not obligated to the mitzvahs, and nonetheless I still do them. That's great. What an opportunity that I have to serve Hashem in this way. Later, when he found out that actually the greatest thing as a person who's obligated to do the mitzvahs, he was commanded to do it, and he does it. That is the greatest thing. In other words, that God commands you to do something is such a great opportunity. It's greater than someone who is not commanded. In other words, kind of like God didn't command you, so you're doing it. That's you're not actually accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, essentially. And when he heard that, he said, anybody who tells me the law is the other way, that a person who's blind is obligated in the mitzvahs, I will make them a great feast. So there's a few other stories associated with the fact that he was blind. He owned a lot of property, and he was a vintner. He made wine, and he had extremely strong wine. It says that he would be careful about making sure that his properties were not damaged. His neighbors' properties, is extremely pious in that way. He was also known as an extremely humble person, and when he passed away, the rabbis made his funeral during the time of Shema, and many, many thousands of people joined his funeral procession. It says that the bridges crossing over the Euphrates River collapsed from the amount of people that went on the bridge on that day. So Rav Yosef, one of the most important rabbis in the Talmud, the Rosh Yeshiva of Pumpedisa. He was Rosh Yeshiva, by the way, in the years 320 to 323, approximately, for about 2.5 years, again, as was predicted, and a really important rabbi who is quoted many, many times in the Talmud. And he was the student, his main student was Abaya, and who succeeded him as Rosh Yeshiva, and which we'll talk about in a further video, was one of probably the most quoted, probably top 2 or 3 most quoted rabbis in the Talmud. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, something I could have said, should have said, please put in the comments. We appreciate the feedback, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.